Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. And, this book kind of flips the script. Instead
Yes.
of diving into like all those, complicated investment strategies and market trends and stuff like that, it really digs into like the psychology behind our money choices, the kind of stuff that, often gets overlooked. But it's like super important. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, like, think about it. How much of our financial success, or like lack of it really comes down to like our own behaviors, our own beliefs about money. It's not always just about, picking the right stocks or whatever.
Solely. And the book, like, it has all these crazy stories that really illustrate this point. Like, you got Ronald Reed, this like janitor, who ends up with like an $8 million fortune.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, you've got Richard Fuscone, Harvard MBA, the whole 9 yards, and he ends up bankrupt.
Wild, right? And like when you look closer at those stories, both of them like took risks. Right. He steadily invested in those like blue chip stocks. And Fuscone, well, he made some, big bets that didn't exactly pan out. It kind of shows you how like even though luck is unpredictable, it totally like intersects with the choices that we make.
Okay, so let's like unpack that for a second.
I-
I'm really curious about this whole luck and risk thing. Like, how can we even tell the difference between, skill and just plain old luck, especially like nowadays when we're just bombarded with all these stories about crazy successful entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And Housel, he uses Bill Gates as kind of like the perfect example. I mean, yeah, Gates, he was obviously brilliant and super driven and all that. But you got to admit, he also got super lucky, like having access to computers in high school back in the 60s. I mean, come on, that was like unheard of back then. It basically put him on this like totally unique path. And then Housel contrasts that with, Gates's friend Kent Evans, this guy who was like equally brilliant. But tragically, he died young. Makes you wonder, like what if their roles had been reversed?
So are you saying that like success is all just random chance? Like we have zero control over it?
No, not exactly. It's way more complicated than that. It's not about like dismissing hard work or talent or anything like that. It's more about like acknowledging that luck plays a role, like recognizing that it's a factor. And I think like once you realize that, it can actually help you make better decisions. Because if you just assume that like every success story is all about skill, you might end up taking on like way more risk than you can handle, thinking that you can just like replicate those results.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. So instead of trying to be like the next Bill Gates, maybe we should be like focusing on building those systems and habits, the kind of stuff that helps us like capitalize on opportunities when luck does come knocking.
Exactly. It's about being prepared, right? Being open to those possibilities and having that like financial flexibility so you can actually like seize those moments when they come up.
That totally makes sense. And it kind of brings us to another like big idea for the book, this whole concept of enough. Housel, he tells this story about Rajat Gupta, this super successful businessman who basically risked everything for an extra $1 million, even though he was already like incredibly wealthy.
Yeah, that story is like a total cautionary tale. It really shows you how like that desire for more, it can totally like lead to disaster.
So it wasn't just about greed then.
No, I think it was more about like not being able to define enough for himself. Like it's this constant chase for more, without really stopping to think about like why or what's actually going to make him happy.
Yeah, I get that. It's like we're always measuring success based on all this external stuff like salary, possessions, status. But those things don't always equal like happiness or fulfillment.
Totally agree. Housel argues that like constantly chasing more can actually make you less satisfied. It's like you achieve a goal, you get this like brief moment of happiness, but then you quickly adapt and you're already setting your sights on the next bigger thing. It's like running on a treadmill, right? You're working your butt off, but you're not really going anywhere.
Okay, so how do we get off this treadmill? Like, how do we figure out what enough is in a world that's like constantly telling us to want more?
It's definitely a personal journey, but I think it starts with like looking inward. Like what actually matters to you? What are your values? What brings you joy? Once you have a better understanding of that stuff, you can start like aligning your financial goals with those deeper values.
So it's more about making like conscious choices.
Yeah.
Choices that actually reflect what we value, instead of just getting caught up in that whole like consumerist culture.
Exactly. And it all ties back to that idea of freedom. If you're always chasing more, you're never really free, You're always going to be like beholden to that next goal, that next achievement.
That's a really good point. This whole conversation reminds me of back when I was a valet in LA. I used to park all these like incredible cars, Bentleys, Ferraris, you name it. And I always just assumed that the owners were like living the dream, But then I got to know some of them. And it turned out that a lot of them were living paycheck to paycheck. totally burdened by debt.
Wow.
They were rich on the outside,
Right.
but not wealthy in like the truest sense of the word.
That's a perfect example of the difference between like richness and wealth, which is something Housel talks about in the book. Richness, it's fleeting, you know? It's all about outward appearances, the stuff you can show off. But wealth, it's different. It's more about like financial security,
Blah.
flexibility, the ability to make choices that align with your values.
So maybe like the first step to figuring out what enough is understanding what like true wealth means to us.
Totally. It's about shifting that focus, you know, from what you can buy to what kind of life you want to create.
Okay, so we've talked about luck risk and this whole idea of enough. Where do we go from here? What are some like practical steps we can take to actually apply these ideas to our own lives?
Well, also, he suggests focusing on the power of saving. I know it might not sound as exciting as, you know, picking winning stocks or whatever, but it's honestly like a cornerstone of building long-term wealth.
Okay, I'm definitely interested to hear more about that. In the next part of our deep dive, let's explore how saving fits into this whole like bigger picture of financial well-being and how we can actually start putting these principles into action. So we just left off talking about saving and, you know, I'm kind of ready to ditch those like get rich quick schemes and really dive into like how this whole saving thing can actually be so powerful.
Yeah, I totally get that. Saving it sometimes gets a bad rap, you know. People think it's boring or like too restrictive. But Housel, he actually makes this like really compelling argument that saving it can actually lead to freedom.
Okay, I'm listening. How does saving equal freedom?
Well, think of it this way. Saving it gives you options. It's that like financial cushion that lets you make choices based on what you actually want, not out of like desperation or necessity.
Like being able to quit a job you hate.
Sure.
Or like taking a year off to travel or something. I think Housel mentioned Derek Sivers in the book. He saved like crazy so he could start his own business without having to worry about like going broke.
Right, exactly. Having that financial safety net, it gives you the freedom to say yes to those opportunities and also to say no to things that you're not really into. It's about like creating a life where you're not constantly stressed about money.
I feel that. Especially after like seeing all those people back when I was a valet, all those folks who looked rich but weren't actually wealthy. It seemed like they were kind of trapped by their lifestyles.
Yeah. That's a super common trap.
Yeah.
We tend to think about freedom in terms of what we can buy, but true freedom, it comes from not being controlled by your spending habits. It's about having the flexibility to make choices that actually align with your values.
So how do we like shift our mindset from spending to saving? It's easy to get caught up in that whole keeping up with the Joneses thing.
I think Housel's advice is to focus on what you don't see. Like all those fancy cars and designer clothes and stuff, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Real wealth, it's built through those like consistent, boring habits, like saving and investing. It's about prioritizing the future over instant gratification.
Okay, so let's talk about investing for a sec.
Yeah.
How does saving actually turn into like building wealth in the long run?
That's where this whole compounding thing comes in. Housel calls it like the eighth wonder of the world. And he's not wrong.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But honestly, the whole compounding thing has always been kind of confusing to me.
It's actually pretty simple. Basically, when you reinvest your earnings, those earnings start generating even more earnings. And then those earnings generate more earnings. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger over time.
So it's not just about saving money then. It's about making that money work for you.
Exactly. And the sooner you start, the better. The more time that snowball has to like grow. He talks about Warren Buffett, who started investing when he was just a teenager. And his wealth, it didn't come from just picking the right stocks. It came from like decades of consistent investing and letting that compounding do its thing.
Wow, that's crazy. So it sounds like patience is like a key ingredient here.
Oh, for sure. We live in a world that's all about instant gratification, but building wealth, it takes time. It's about playing the long game, resisting that urge to like chase quick returns, and just trusting the process.
It's like that saying, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Love that analogy. And it's so true for investing. Even if you haven't started yet, it's never too late. The important thing is to just start. Make that commitment to your future self.
Okay, so we've covered saving, investing, and the whole power of compounding thing. What other insights does Housel have about building a solid financial foundation?
He talks a lot about the importance of defining like what game you're playing. When it comes to money, are you like a short-term trader trying to make a quick buck? or are you in it for the long haul?
Yeah, that makes sense. You wouldn't use the same strategy for a sprint
Mhm.
as you would for a marathon.
Exactly. If you're a long-term investor, you got to learn to tune out all that noise, like the daily ups and downs of the market, and just focus on that long-term growth potential.
So it's about realizing that there are like different approaches to finance, and what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us to this idea of like respecting the mess, which is something Housel talks about. Personal finance, it's not like a perfect science. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, no magic formula.
I like that. It takes the pressure off, like we don't have to have all the answers figured out.
Right. It's about being open to different ideas, learning from our mistakes, and realizing that things are always changing.
So how do we navigate this mess then? Like, how do we make smart choices when there's so much conflicting information out there?
That's where that whole psychology of money thing comes in. Housel argues that we got to be aware of our own emotions, our biases, our past experiences. All that stuff can influence our financial decisions.
So it's not just about understanding the numbers then, it's about understanding ourselves.
You got it. We all have our own unique financial psychology, and the better we understand it, the better decisions we'll make.
This has been super insightful. I'm starting to see how these seemingly simple ideas about saving and investing and psychology can actually have such a huge impact on our financial well-being.
It's all about shifting that mindset, from chasing quick riches to building a solid foundation for long-term freedom.
I'm ready to put these principles into action. In the final part of our deep dive, let's explore some specific strategies for managing our money and creating a life of purpose and financial well-being. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big ideas and the psychology of money, but now I want to get practical. How do we actually take all this stuff and use it in our own lives?
Well, I think it comes down to building a system,
Yeah.
a framework for making financial decisions. That really aligns with your personality and your goals. Housel, he doesn't give you a strict set of rules or anything. It's more about designing something that works for you.
I like that because a lot of financial advice, it feels kind of like one size fits all.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always work. So where do we even begin with building this system?
It all starts with self-awareness. Before you even open a spreadsheet or download a budgeting app or whatever, take some time to think about your relationship with money. Are you impulsive with spending? Are you more disciplined? Do you hate taking risks? Once you figure out your strengths and weaknesses, you can start designing a system that plays to those strengths and helps you avoid those weaknesses.
So if you're an impulse shopper, you could set up automatic savings and investments. That way the money's gone before you can even spend it.
Exactly. Or if you tend to freak out when the market dips, you could come up with a set of investment rules and just stick to them no matter what's happening in the market. It's all about having those guardrails in place.
Yeah, systems that keep you on track.
Exactly. Even when you're feeling emotional.
Okay, so understanding our psychology is the foundation. What else should we be thinking about?
Housel talks a lot about having a margin of safety in your financial life. Because let's face it, life throws curveballs. Job loss, medical bills, global pandemics. Having that financial buffer can be a lifesaver.
It's like building that resilience so you can handle those unexpected things.
Yeah, that margin of safety could be an emergency fund,
Yeah.
paying off high-interest debt, or just living a little below your means so you have some wiggle room.
It's about having that breathing room.
So you can make choices from a place of strength, not panic.
It's funny thinking back to those folks I met as a valet, the ones who looked rich but were actually struggling. I'm realizing that real financial security, it comes from having that solid foundation, not just the outward appearance of success.
Totally agree. It's about playing that long game, which is something Housel talks about a lot, especially with investing. He has this analogy about market volatility. He says you should think of it as a fee, not a fine.
I like that. So instead of panicking when the market drops, we should see those dips as the price we pay for the chance to grow our money over the long term.
That's the idea. Don't let those short-term ups and downs derail your long-term goals.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Housel also talks about how stories can influence our beliefs about money. How can we use that to our advantage?
I think it's about being more aware of the stories we're consuming and the stories we're telling ourselves. What messages are we absorbing? Are they helpful or are they holding us back?
So if we're constantly watching shows about getting rich quick or seeing all these influencers with their fancy lifestyles, we might end up chasing unrealistic goals.
Exactly. But if we focus on stories of people who built their wealth slowly and steadily, People who prioritized financial security over like short-term gratification, those stories can be super inspiring.
Yeah, it's about creating our own positive financial story.
A story that aligns with our values and helps us make good decisions.
Well, this has been amazing. I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of my own relationship with money now, and I have some actual tools I can use to create a more secure and fulfilling financial future.
It's a journey, remember? Be patient, be persistent, and most importantly, enjoy the ride.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the psychology of money. We hope these insights from Morgan Housel have inspired you to take control of your financial well-being and create a life that's both meaningful and abundant and